Hello, I'm Chris Slisher, and welcome to Turning of the Wheel, an intelligent, lively discussion about astrology, art, and spiritual adventure. Timing is everything, and as the great wheel turns, we are best prepared when we are best informed. Join me as I explore concepts that allow us to broaden our view of the world. You'll hear interesting topics, meet fascinating guests, and discover who you really are. Using the time-tested practices of astrology, you'll learn how to accept change as the great wheel of life turns. Astrology, art, and spiritual adventure on Turning of the Wheel TV with Chris Slisher. Hello and welcome to Turning of the Wheel. As you know, this is a show about astrology, art, and spiritual adventure, and today I'm going to be discussing the sign of Scorpio. Over the last several months or so, I've been going through each of the individual signs to give you a brief overview of what they look like, what they like, in case you have a friend or you're involved with the Scorpio or involved with the sign. This will give you a broad overview of what these signs are all about. So Scorpio is an interesting sign. Scorpio gets kind of a bad rap sometimes because people often assume that they're the sort of the nasty stingers of the world. And in some cases they will be, but I'll get into that as we get further on. First of all, I want to say that Scorpio is a birthday that is born between October 22nd and November 20th. If you fall within that range, you are a Scorpio by your sun sign. Scorpio is what's known as a fixed water sign. Now, when I say fixed, that does not imply that they're broken. Fixed means that they're immovable, sort of permanent, like something is fixed to the floor, like you hammer a piece of wood to the floor, that's fixed, meaning that it's stable, excuse me, will not move and is stationary. So in that comment, a fixed sign, fixed water sign, each of the three modalities, cardinal, fixed, and mutable, all have an individual sign for each of the four elements. Scorpio, in this case, is the water sign for the fixed modality. Fixed, again, as I said, it means that they are fairly rigid in their views. The other people who are fixed signs are Leos, Tauruses, and Aquariuses, but we're talking about Scorpio today. Scorpio is a fixed sign, meaning that they are, as I said, very stubborn sometimes, immovable, and what it basically comes down to with a sign that has fixed qualities, I think the best thing to associate it with is their inability to sort of change their minds. That's not to say that they don't change their minds or can't change their minds. It's just that more often than not, once their opinion is made up, once they have a view, once they have some sort of an idea where they're going, that is where they're going to stay. They very rarely move off of that place. So that's an important characteristic, because if you are involved with somebody and you're in an argument with a Scorpio, for example, and they say this is this, they're not going to move from that standpoint. Now, these are broad generalities, but they do apply. You speak to somebody who's a Scorpio, or you speak to somebody who knows a Scorpio intimately, and you mention the word stubborn to them, and they'll say, oh boy, are they ever. This is just the key quality. Not a bad quality, it's just a characteristic that all Scorpios share, as well as all other fixed signs. Now, Scorpio is ruled by Mars and by Pluto. Now, Mars is the old original rulership of Scorpio, and it makes sense because Mars is about anger, aggression, ambition, and it's also the ruling sign, the ruling planet for Aries as well. But when we discovered the planet Pluto, astrologers ascribe both Mars and Pluto to Scorpio as the ruling planets, and it makes sense because of the simple fact that there's a lot of qualities that Scorpios exhibit that are manifested by the archetypal representation of those other planets that I mentioned. First and foremost, let's go through the positive things about a Scorpio. Scorpios are incredibly loyal. They are the most loyal of all the signs. So if you've got a Scorpio as a friend, they may be opinionated and stubborn, but they're always going to be there for you. They are loyal. They are extremely good with dealing into details and getting beneath the subjects, getting into the dark ends of the subject. So Scorpios are the ones that don't mind getting under the covers and seeing all the nasty stuff that's beneath the veneer of somebody. That is also a quality of they have a certain sense of depth to them, a certain mysterious quality. They can be very intuitive, like all water signs. All water signs have a certain intuitive quality to them. Scorpio is no different. The other water signs are Cancer and Pisces, also very intuitive in that regard. But Scorpio has that deep sort of mystical, regenerative kind of quality. They're also represented by the 8th house in astrology, which we'll get to as I go through the houses and the sun signs. But they also have a desire to be secretive. And secrecy, in some respects, is an unusual quality because Sometimes it can be very helpful to be secretive. Other times it can turn around and bite you. And I'll get into that subject a little bit later when I start talking about some of the famous Scorpios who are on the world that you'll recognize very clearly. Scorpios, again, is represented by the phoenix. This is sort of the one that, rises from the ashes. This is very much of the symbolic quality of Scorpio, is sort of this death and regeneration, which is why it's associated with the 8th house. There's this whole process of, sort of dying and then rising up from the ashes to be born again. That is the symbol of Scorpio. Scorpio is also associated with sex and death. Now, those two things seem to be, different ends of the spectrum, but they do represent, in some capacity, the archetypal illustration of what a Scorpio is. It's all about regeneration. So regeneration is procreation, which would indicate sex. Death would be the other end of the spectrum. So there's that quality that's very real in them. And they're not afraid to go to dark places. They have a fascination with all kinds of things, such as details. Very good with getting research, digging beneath the covers, as I said, to get the research. If you've got a Scorpio lawyer on your side or a Scorpio politician, you can be sure that they're going to be tenacious and persistent in their pursuit of whatever their agenda is. And this is very important to understand this. So let's go through Scorpio in each of the 12 houses, as I usually do for each of the signs, because this will give you an idea how the Scorpio personality represents itself when it lands in the house. Now, the houses, as you know, are determined by the time of birth, not the day of birth. This is the time that you were born. This sets the whole paradigm for the individual person. So it's important to understand the time of birth. If you don't know your time of birth, ask your mother. I'm pretty sure she was there. Or try to find your birth certificate at the Hall of Records or something like that where it states the birth time on there. Once you know that, then that sets the orientation of the chart, and that's all the houses line up. Because everybody who's a Scorpio is going to have a different array of houses, and that means that the sun will fall in a different place around the whole different wheel. If you need more information, contact me at my website, turningofthewheel.com, and also turningofthewheel.tv is also my other spot. turningofthewheel.com has an online calculator. You can enter in your birth date, place, and time, and you'll find out what your rising sign is, which would then orient the whole chart. If you want more information, contact me. I do personal readings all the time to help you get through and understand your chart. So, if you have a Scorpio sun in the first house, you are going to come across as a very Scorpio-like person. The first house represents the outer exterior of the individual. This is sort of what the person projects. Typically, a Scorpio in the first house is a very sensuous kind of person, very attractive, sort of that deep, lusty mysticism, kind of like an Elizabeth Taylor, even though she's not a Scorpio. But she has that sort of quality about her, that sort of that smoky, sultriness that comes across very warm and very, sort of sexy is the only word I can say for it. It comes across. But also, in that quality is that extreme loyalty and that extreme secretivity, or the secretiveness that is there, very quality all the time. Secrecy can be a wonderful characteristic in an individual. It can also be their downfalls. We'll get into some of the most famous people as we get down the road further. Second house. If you have Scorpio in the second house, your sun is in Scorpio in the second house, you are very good with money. This is your main drive. Money, resources, this is where you would do really well. This is where you might find someone on the trading floor of the New York Stock Exchange, for example. Someone who understands, maybe insider trading, there's the secrecy, but also is very good for their clients, doing the right thing for their clients. This is where you might find someone who has a real affinity for understanding knowledge of money, transactions, anything that has to do with the money or the resources in general. So that's very much of a strong Scorpio trait in the second house. If your sun is in Scorpio and it falls in the third house, the odds are very good that you are a communicator, and a communicator of great depth. This is where you'd find someone who is able to be a mystery writer, for example, someone who's not afraid to go to that dark side that I mentioned earlier. Also, the same thing would be true for someone who does investigative journalism. This is a very good spot for someone to be, because they have that ability to get, as I said, beneath the scenes. What's lurking behind this mystique of this person when they're doing the research on the sort of investigative reporting. Very strong quality there. Also very good with writing and words. This is where they're motivated by that, or a person who has that sun in the third house. Sun, a Scorpio sun that lands in the fourth house, indicates a person who has the ability to sort of be the central focus of the family and the domestic scene, and the house, and all things that have to do with that domestic scene are very, very important to them. This is where loyalty will pay off very well. It's also where secrecy could be a problem if you've got something, a ghost in your closet, so to speak, or a skeleton in your closet. That's where you'll find it in that 4th house. When we move to the 5th house in Scorpio, Scorpio Sun in the 5th house indicates a person who's incredibly creative. This is where you'd find the real creative geniuses, those who use that depth, that mysteriousness, that sense of ominous mystery and this secrecy. That's where you'd see it come to light. As I get into the list later on, we'll understand some of the people who have that strong characteristic. But the first person that comes to mind is Pablo Picasso, very famous Scorpio. Also a very famous artist. And you could tell by looking at his artwork that he had a real sense of mystery about him. There was a certain sort of, abstract for sure. We know that abstraction is the realm of the Scorpio because they're not afraid to go places where other people may be afraid of. When we go on to the 6th house, when we see a Scorpio Sun in the 6th house, we see a person who's willing to give almost everything of themselves for others. This is a person who loves to serve. As you know, the 6th house is the house of service, and in the house of service, we see this ability to be there for others. This is the real quality of the Scorpio in this situation. So therefore, you might find doctors, nurses, dentists, all people like that would fall into that situation because that is the realm that they are most comfortable in. This is the realm of the 6th house, which again, as I said, is the house of service. So house of service does not mean you're going to be a waitress in a donut shop, but it does mean that you're willing to serve. So lawyers, very good. A 6th house lawyer would be very good because they'd be on your side, they'd be loyal, they'd be trying to help you as a client. So a very important part of that would be there. When we move to the 7th house and we see the Sun in Scorpio in the 7th house, we see a person who is very much of a solid partner. The 7th house is the house of relationships. When we deal with relationships and the individual, and the Scorpio Sun is there, we're going to find a person who is undyingly loyal. This is the person who will always be there for their partner. Very good person. And also will manifest that sensual quality about themselves as well. This is the area where they feel free to express themselves. There's this great sense of sensuality, this sense of loyalty which come through and help manifest and build up the individual relationship. A very key person, a key point in the chart, if that is where your Sun lands. And again, as I mentioned before, how you tell which house your Scorpio Sun is in is based on the time of birth. You need to understand the time of birth. If you don't understand the time of birth, contact me at my website, turningofthewheel.com, and you'll see for sure that where that makes sense and how that makes where your Sun will land and how that will manifest itself throughout the course of your life. The 8th house, as I mentioned before earlier, the 8th house is the house that is represented by Scorpio. This is the house of sex and death, regeneration. Again, this is regeneration. Regeneration means to be coming up from the bottom and to reborn out of the ashes. This is the symbol of the Scorpio. Not only is the scorpion, the insect, also the sign, but that scorpion is self-destructive in that case. But in the case of the 8th house, a Scorpio would be one who is involved with end-of-life issues, working for large organizations, working with elderly people, working with inheritances and wills, and outside money. In other words, other people's money. Again, 8th house is directly across from the 2nd house, so there's that common link with money. In the case of the 8th house, it's other people's money. So you might see somebody who's more inclined to work with as a hedge fund manager perhaps, or someone who is more inclined to deal with, estate planning, wills, all the things in that area. This is very much the case. Large organizations, universities, municipalities, large governments are also ruled by the 8th house. That's where you'd find a person with that kind of characteristic. When we move to the 9th house, the 9th house is the house of spirituality. It's the house of travel. It's the house of education. A Scorpio with a person with a Scorpio Sun in the 9th house would be an individual who had a certain knack for teaching, a certain knack for travel, a person who is comfortable in that realm, sort of the realm of the traveler, where you're out looking for new things and trying to find new ways of looking at life, interested in discovering new characteristics of what it means to be a human being. Also very bound by religious ideas and spirituality in general. The Scorpio is not afraid, as I said before, to go into those dark areas. They're very real in this area. And this is an interesting area because they might be great teachers or might be great spiritual leaders with that certain Scorpio magnetism, which is so charismatic. We'll see that as we get into some of the names I've got listed of people who are well-known Scorpios. Also, interesting place is that we find academics here, we find teachers here, we find people who are explorers would be a good place to figure. A Scorpio explorer in the 9th house, sun in the 9th house would be very much the case. When we move to the 10th house is the house of career. And the Scorpio sun in the 10th house indicates a person who not only is loyal to their employer or to their clients, but also very, very determined and driven to be an effective worker. So their ideas in this area, they give them a place to go, give them a duty to do with limitations and boundaries, and they will flourish there. Again, the idea of that fixity is there. This is someone you want to negotiate for you. If you're in a business situation, you might find a lawyer who has a 10th house Scorpio sun because of that ability to be on your side, to be your advocate, to be that sort of social outreach, to be that advocate for you. This is a very, very interesting placement for the Scorpio sun. When we move to the 11th house, the 11th house is the house of business associates. It's the house of groups. It's the house of who you work with. And if you're working in a team, it's at work. This is where you'd find your people who are the team players. Scorpio in the 11th house is an interesting situation because of the simple fact that it's the team playing piece that's fine, and the way that they manipulate the team playing situation might be that secrecy comes into either be a wonderful quality or it could be a downfall. I'll get into that a little bit more as we get further on. But a team player, a Scorpio is a team player, is going to be a loyal player, again that term loyalty, but there may be some secrets going on behind the scene that you've got to be a little bit careful about that. Just something to be aware of. If you're there, you know who you are. If you know people in your life and you're on a team and there's a Scorpio and they are that type of person in the team, the odds are very good that they may be that type of person and they may very well have an 11th house Scorpio sun. Finally, we come to the 12th house. The 12th house is the house of transition. It's also the house that is ruled by Pluto, and it's sort of the area where we see transition. Transition, as I've mentioned in the past, is a point in time where we cross from one point of life to the next. So oftentimes people think of transition as death, and yes, it does imply death, leaving the living plane and going to the other plane, but it also represents a transition from nothing to life. I always use the example of pregnancy. Perhaps you've heard me say it before, that if a person is pregnant and for 9 months and all of a sudden the pregnancy comes to an end, what happens at the end? A child is born. That is a transition. It's from one state to the next. That's the idea of the transition. So even though the 12th house often deals with deaths and endings and all that, it also has just as much potential to deal with new beginnings and new ideas. So this is where the regenerative quality comes in. Again, to be clear, in order to understand which house your sun is in, if you are a Scorpio, you have to find out your rising sign. Your rising sign is the time of birth. It is dictated by the time of birth at which you were born. This is the hour and the minute of the day that you were born, whether it's 2 p.m., 8 a.m., or whatever. That sets the course for the individual to understand where that sun will land in. If that sun landing in one of those houses is going to have a sun that lands in the 3rd house is going to be far different than a sun that lands in the 10th house perhaps, or the 2nd or the 6th. There's just a different arena. It's like stepping onto a stage platform where the things are different in that regard. Now, what I want to get into is some of the famous people who I've mentioned, who I want to mention, that are Scorpios. And when I do this, this will help illustrate those characteristics. So as we look at them through the public eye and how they operate and how they work, we will know very much what it's all about. As I mentioned, Pablo Picasso is an artist. He probably has his sun in the 5th house. I don't know that, but if you contact me, I can tell you for sure. Pablo Picasso was a revolutionary starter, very progressive person who is not afraid to delve into abstract concepts and understand unusual ideas about art and how to represent art. Very much of a progressive, very, very intense person. He was known to have a large sexual appetite, also plays well into the idea of the Scorpio. And who knows what secrets he had. I'm sure he had many. Robert Kennedy is another one. This is the younger brother of John Fitzgerald Kennedy, who was also assassinated in June of 1968, I believe it was, yes. And he was the Attorney General underneath John F. Kennedy. His brother was the Attorney General. And he was a very, very fiercely loyal, fiercely righteous man who wanted to fight for the good of the common man. As a result, he went after the mafia. If you recall, he was on a crusade of some sorts to bring out the mafia, and he was willing to go beneath the covers, as I mentioned, to get as much information as he possibly could at the time. This was 1968, don't forget. There was no websites, there was no internet, none of that stuff existed at the time. Leonardo DiCaprio is a famous Scorpio actor. Now, we see the roles he's played. We see him in The Wolf of Wall Street. We've seen him in any number of different films where he's played. But you can just tell by looking at him. He's got that certain stare, that certain magnetic, charismatic stare that goes with him that really represents that. He could very well be a Scorpio with his sun in the 5th house. Again, that's about creativity. That's about that sense of expressing. He may also be a Scorpio in the 3rd house because he loves to communicate. He communicates by using his acting skills as a means to communicate. So that's very real as well. Bill Gates, of all people, Bill Gates. Mr. Microsoft himself is a Scorpio, and he has the ability to do very, very well. He's probably a 2nd house, 10th house, or perhaps an 8th house. I think perhaps, I'm not sure, but 8th house, 10th house might be the most appropriate place for his son to be because of the simple fact that he's been so successful. Very dogged, very loyal, very persistent. You have to be a strong leader in order to do this. In order to manage what he has managed in his life, you need to be a strong leader. That requires charisma, requires fortitude, requires the ability to discern. This is one of the things that Scorpios do very well. They are able to discern that which is right, that which is wrong. Once they understand what that is, they stick with it and they do not move. Very, very interesting. The next one you're really going to be fascinated in, Caitlyn Jenner. Caitlyn Jenner, the transgender person who just had their sex change, is a Scorpio. And you can see it in their ability to be, there's a certain secrecy about them. There's a certain sense of sensuality that's there for sure. You can see that in what she's trying to present. Even as a male, he tried to present himself in that way. Very competitive, very loyal, and always, perhaps for all those years that he was an Olympic performer, well-known, highly regarded Olympic gold medal winner, he had this secret beneath him all the time. Finally, the secret came out. He made a sex change, and that's who he is now, so we know that. And another interesting politician who's a Scorpio is Joe Biden, Vice President Joe Biden. Joe Biden is a fiercely loyal man. One of the things that Barack Obama has mentioned about Joe Biden is his loyalty. This is a very key. When he was singing his praises one time at a press club dinner, Barack Obama said he could not have done this past 8 years of his time in office had it not been for a loyal, guided, trusted aide such as Joe Biden. So Joe Biden was a great asset to Barack Obama and made his life much easier as a result of having not only the fortitude and the time to put into this, but also to work behind the scenes on behalf of the president. Interestingly enough, another Scorpio who was in that same realm is John Boehner, who used to be Speaker of the House. John Boehner is known as a Scorpio, and a Scorpio, came up against a Leo. And a Leo is President Barack Obama. President Barack Obama is a Leo with Aquarius rising. Both of those are fixed signs. So you got fixed, fixed, and fixed. Not much got accomplished, as we've been able to see. When the two of them got together, they both held their views, and very, very rarely did they vary from that point. And we know that John Boehner was a very sort of colorful, very popular in some ways, very charismatic individual in that realm, and we could see that very clearly in sort of the way he played out on the international stage. Famous actors, Danny DeVito. Who would have thought that Danny DeVito would be a Scorpio? But he is. He's got that certain fixed quality. You can remember him from the old days of Taxi or It's Always Sunny in Philadelphia. You see that characteristic come through in him. Some of these things you just can't hide. If you are this type of person, it's hard to hide these things. Those of you who live in Boston or are followers of the Boston Red Sox will be happy to know that David Ortiz, Big Papi, who's just finishing up his last year in baseball, is also a Scorpio. Very famous Scorpio, and interesting in that regard. Another famous politician or world figure, Prince Charles, of all people, is a Scorpio. Now we know Prince Charles had some secrets with his affairs outside of his relationship with Princess Diana. We know that he is also, the next in line, but he left his marriage and went on to marry an outsider who, probably was held under the wraps of the British monarchy for many years, hidden beneath the view. So that sort of subterfuge, that sense of surreptitious hiding, that sort of behind the hidden veil, clearly classified someone such as Prince Charles. For all those years, he was living a double life. Very much the case with a Scorpio. Interestingly enough, Megyn Kelly, if you remember the first debate, Megyn Kelly was the one that got under Donald Trump's skin, and he got under her skin, obviously, because she is a Scorpio as well. You can see that piercing, sexy quality in her face, her eyes, that deep sense of understanding what's going on, the ability to penetrate the hard questions, to go where others are afraid to go. This is one of her greatest qualities. This is a strong, strong Scorpio trait. Julia Roberts is another actress who's a Scorpio. You can see it in her style. She probably also has her sun in the 5th house, most likely. And the last one I'm going to tell you about, and you'll all perhaps get a chuckle out of this, is Hillary Clinton. Hillary Clinton is a Scorpio. And do I have to say secrecy any louder or any clearer than that? She has had this problem. This is a problem, even though she's loyal, she's tenacious, she's been a public servant for years. She's done everything in her power to do good for the country, I think well-intended. But in the course of that, her own sense of secrecy has gotten in the way of her life. And this is where the idea of secrecy and a Scorpio can really be your undoing. It's coming to fruition now. You have only so many skeletons you can keep in your closet. Sooner or later, the skeletons are going to come out, perhaps when you don't want them to. And this is the problem often happens with a Scorpio. They get themselves into a situation where they have to be secretive, or they automatically default to secretive, perhaps because they're afraid of being exposed, because of their ability to delve into deep topics and to be investigative and to be curious and to operate in that regard. There is this tendency to sort of cover that up so no one knows. They feel in some ways almost as if they can operate better under a cloak, and that cloak of secrecy provides them with the ability to do more. The only problem with that is that when the secrecy gets revealed, what happens? We have catastrophe, we have corruption charges, we have, all sorts of, allegations placed against her because of the type of person that she has been, and the whole email scandal. All those things point to that secrecy. In many ways, she's the epitome of a secretive person. Her birth time is currently unknown, so we don't know exactly which house her sun is in, but we know that she exhibits those Scorpio signs. So again, Scorpio is a fixed water sign, October 22nd to November 20th. If you're born in that time zone, you are a Scorpio. It's important to know where your sun is in which house. In order to determine that, you need to get the birth time. Contact me at turningofthewheel.com and write to me for an email, and I will give you your time and where your sun is in your chart. It's very important. Scorpio is a very rich, magnetic, charismatic sign, and I'll talk to you all next week.